Poof! Good gracious, we got sound now. My apologies and welcome to another session from the Wise Asylum. A place where you get treated without medication. That's gotta be good. And I love that there. You're not at Creamfields. Well done for that, man. That's great. You're quite right, we're not. I think I need to put that old gizmo through the old logic. Just tone it down a bit because it's very difficult to find somewhere where I can just stop it. So that might have to have a little bit of editing going on there, so it's a little bit better. So lots going on out there in the old nut job world, but we're not going to discuss that because it's got to be doing. We want to deal with truth and wisdom and good things that can change our mindsets and stop us from getting screwed over by the old propaganda. And we've got a few messages here. Probably people telling me they can't hear me. Thank you. Yep. I think we've sorted it. Thank you very much, chaps, for that. Yep, it's the delay on it. It gives it that bit. Yeah, so we're not communicating in time. We're just a bit of a delay going on, but never mind that. But there is one thing you need to know. The fruitcakes up there on the old carrot cake mountain are deciding in October whether they want to push the electronic currency. So you've got between now and then to use cash. Cash. And if they try and refuse it, you really do need to get a grip on that and make sure you tell them it's legal tender, and if they do continue to refuse it, you will take them to court and do it, you know. Not only that, the old rule is if you offer to pay 3 times, so you've got a huge basket of food, they're refusing cash, explain you want to pay cash 3 times, you can walk out then after that with the produce because you've offered to pay them 3 times. You know, of course, that you're going to get into bother and all sorts of stuff, but this is the kind of action people are going to have to consider. You know, you're going to have to make a stand here. Cash. You got your money, go to the cash machine, draw out a couple of hundred, use that in the day. One, you're not being tracked. So your carbon, you know, you're not being counted for your eating meat, you're not being counted for your fuel. You should never buy food with it, with your card. You should never buy fuel either because they know your carbon count in the future, you know. Think of it in that way. You know, if there's certain things you want to just use it for ease, fine. But best bet is what I do, go to cash machine, draw it out, and nobody has a clue what I'm doing. Nobody has foggiest what I'm doing apart from this big cash machine and drawing out X amount of cash. We don't know what he's up to. Best bet. But you've got till October. Yeah, Carrot Cake Mountain and the fruit bats thereof, or the financial elect, are going to make a decision there in old October. So, you know, people say, well, what can we do? That's what you can do. Yeah, forget trying to persuade next door neighbour. Forget that. People come and ask you questions, talk them, but after that, forget that. You're looking after yourself, but things that you can actually do. And that is one thing that everybody can do. Get to the cash machine, draw the cash, that's how you spend it. If everybody starts doing that now, you know, come October, they're going to say, oh, we haven't got the margins, we've not got the percentages, blah, 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 we'll have riots on the street. Yeah, I mean, it's getting to a point now where it's really silly. I talk to a lot of people who are in this game that are doing this stuff day in, day out, and they say the same thing. Everybody wants to pay with a card. And if you pull them on it, well, it's just easy. It's like, yeah, you're born-eyed fruit bats. And as they stand there in pyjamas and slippers, buying food in the 10th century and such. So, yeah, you know, that's what you can do. That's the shindig. What else have we got? Did you see that? Putin's private buccaneer there has been snotted, apparently, in a crash on a helicopter. Or no, sorry, a plane. But you've got to bear in mind this particular character has already been resurrected from the dead in 2019 when it was said he was killed then. So this guy looks like he's trying to imitate Jesus. He wants to resurrect at will. And I'm pretty sure at some point down the line he'll turn up and all his troops will be, yo, we love you, we love you, we love you, we don't like Vlad. So what the hell's going on there, I don't know. But don't think for a second that this guy's dead. And very much dead. So that's just another bit of bunkum that we don't really need to talk about because it is pretty shit anyway. Right, what have we got tonight? Well, we're going to continue slightly on the topic that we've been covering in the last few live streams. And then we're going to get very occult. And I mean if you want to know what it is that invaded the minds of the elite first, when they secured Schofield Bible amongst the aristocracy, debauched them through the 20s and 30s. In that time, obviously, they created jazz by merging blues and swing. That's what got the roaring 20s and the debauched 30s going. That got the aristocracy on board. They were struggling here because the clergy wouldn't take it on the Schofield Bible at all. Cecil Hotel came out. All the Ivy League boys were encouraged to come through there, while the Scottish Rite, important we get a difference between York Rite and Scottish Rite, did attack all these young Ivy League fruit bats and then send them back on into America to join the Scottish Rite, of course. Yeah. Don't join the York Rite because that's all English. We hate the English because they're the cause of everything. When in fact, that's not the case. The Scottish Rite's been running, or the Scottish Presbyterians have been running England and the British Isles in its entirety for centuries. The Whigs, the Liberals, that's who these Whigs, Presbyterian, Scottish Rite geezers are. And as we looked at the other week, because what it's looking like in the investigations that I've got going on at the moment is that we've mentioned Blenheim Palace, the seat of the Dukes of Marlborough, Churchill, all that shindig, or to put it bluntly, the castle of the mass murdering pigs, because that's exactly what that family's done. First to bite for the Civil War over here, etc. So very well in sync with the Dutch financiers, also the Presbyterian Scottish Rite. That's what's been going down all over the shop. So the weeks came in. Blenheim Palace does appear to be their uber super castle, their place of heritage, etc. So we do need to keep this demarcation going as far as two sides to this Freemasonry malarkey. York Rite, you had to be Christian. Scottish Rite, you could be the kind of guy that likes to mix love in the fields with your cows and your sheep. Anything goes in the old Scottish Rite system. So another thing we need to keep in mind. But something else that we're interested in as well, that Gates, that we miss with this fruitcake, that a big part of what he was doing through his time after creating a virus on the internet requiring Windows to consistently give you updates to fight the virus that he created in the first place, then transferred all his wealth and excitement and ill-advised win and willies into the realm of the old synthetic concoctions. And the rest is history. You all know exactly what it's all about. But what you probably haven't gathered is because it doesn't actually state it clearly when you watch the copious amounts of interviews he's done, is that what he was actually doing on a brag is telling everybody, these elites, that what they can actually do is get rid of chromosome 8 through these games that they play. And of course, chromosome 8 has been cited as the very, very gene that keeps people connected to the idea that there is a much higher power above the place we find ourselves in today, the third dimension, in our little avatars. But yet we have our source in that very same place, which is far superior in power, omnipotence, etc., than this third dimension. And we know it as Elohim. But then the English translation screwed it up, as it always does, as give us the term God. Well, God singular, but of course, before that it was gods. There were lots of them. Anybody could claim to be a god at any particular given time. And if they had a bit of power, a bit of cash, people believed them. It's just nothing's changed today. These people actually do believe the gods. That's what they've been chasing. And that's exactly what we're going to look at in a little minute in relation to what it is that's actually enveloped all these hoity-toits over these last couple 100 years and turned them into complete and utter fruit bats. It's there to be seen if you want to see it. But also just a bit of a caution in that I watched a video this week at Blenheim Palace, and it was the 75th birthday of one of the American ambassadors to Denmark, Lord Leob, or Loeb, called Leob and all that malarkey. And 350 guests, and in this video it went through the guests, it gave you the names, etc. So, and in truth, there were a lot of people there that I'd never even heard of. But then this was a big American branch of what they called themselves a family. And so, of course, a lot of these names were not known to me. So this is the Whigs through Blenheim, Grosvenors, Duke of Westminster, Marlboroughs, Cavendishes, Spencers, Churchills, all these rebellious bunch, Whigamores, Scottish Rite, moved over into the US and of course have become 20 times more powerful than they were on these isles, even through the days of the British Empire. But what struck me quite in watching that is that you look at these people and you can't but see that these people are in a bubble. They don't know anything outside the lifestyles they've lived since they were born. So they were born into this wealth. They have no concept of what it means to be in the lesser bubbles. They have no idea. And that you can see that in there's only a certain amount of people within that crew that actually know what's going on. The rest of them haven't got a clue. And so it hits home that, I mean, a big part of the way the programming's gone is to fix everybody into a bubble. Left, right, Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, whatever, New Ager, Luciferian, Satanist. We've gone through this. All out there in the territory, real because it's manifest, but if you actually pull yourself back and look at the actual reality of it, it's all outside of you unless you choose to play in one of those particular arenas. So it's external to you. It's not the kingdom that the man said he represented, which is from within. You're going back to Genesis 1 and the Elohim, not this particular idea of a singular power, as it were. We've been through all that. But just looking at these people, you can see that they don't know their ass from their elbow. To them, they're just doing what they've done, not realising that at the higher level, all their energies, all their wealth, everything that they have is being used to circumvent what it is they believe they are, and to turn them into basically slaves eventually, because that's what Mr. Old Swab has said, because that's what Henry Kissinger told him to say, because the WF is basically Kissinger associates. So we've gone through all that malarkey, we've seen it, we've explored it, we can see its potential, and you can see that as far as percentage goes, the potential for it to be real far outweighs the potential for it to just be coincidence. It's ridiculous. And the more you've studied about these subjects the more you can see yourself. It's not a coincidence. There's an interconnection there, because when you see who's playing what, where, and when, they're all pissing in the same pot. Yeah, they're all playing with the same idea, the Ring of Solomon. They're forcing their way into an exit because that's the mindset. That's the way they are. Anyway, that's that. So I'll have a look at what you guys are saying, and then we'll crack on. First, we're going to have a look at Trumpet. Just a little bit of a context into the historical side of it, because of course everybody, the biggest show on the planet at the moment it's Trump versus the entire deep state, the world, and everything that's nasty. Where when you actually understand the game, they're all pissing in the same pot, they're all part of the same elite, they're all taking the orders from the same director. And there's a script for the left, there's a script for the right. Let's say, we've mentioned this before, but if anybody's come to this cult, let's just say that way back in the day, when nations were the idea under a kingdom, that let's say there were 22 rules that you needed to run a nation. The Crown, through the Commonwealth of Parliaments that were created after the Civil War, etc., etc. They tore that piece of paper, that 22 rules, in half, give 11 rules to the left and 11 rules to the right. Each side then has got essential necessities in order for a nation to function, thus gives each side absolute reality in the minds of the masses. It's just a case of on which side you think you'll get the most from. Will determine, what did your mummy and daddy support, what did the teachers support that you fancied and all this malarkey, what did your favourite celebrity sing about, has basically shoved you onto one side or the other. But neither on their own are going to ever put the nation back together again, and that's deliberate. So, everything's a bubble. Working class, you're encouraged to despise the middle class is encouraged to look down on the working class and then look up to the higher middle class, etc. It's a bubble. Everybody's in a bubble, and you only know your bubble. Your parameters have been set for you, and that's basically how they have the whole world broken up. And you're in your bubble, and I could see that watching this video that these people haven't got a fucking clue what's going on. They've no idea, no more or less than you and I out there. They've no idea. So we have to break that bubble and stop living by the parameters that have been given us. Let's not hate them up there, because they need us as much as we need them. But they need to awaken as much as we need to awaken, except blah, 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 blah. And then we can have a line from the highest or the peak of the old pyramid right down to ground and earth. It has movement. It's solid because it's from the ground up. And it can work its way back up there. We can change people's minds. People can see that no matter what the station is today, no matter what smoke's being blown up their ass, down the line, it's the intent of these fruitcakes from Carrot Cake Mountain to take everything, the lot, everything you've got, one way or another, it's going. And that has to be cemented in everybody's minds, no matter what level of society you think you're at. Yeah, minds that think alike need to start coming together and moving together, and otherwise, well, we can see what's going down. Last week, we touched on Apollyon. Now, I've studied this back in the day, so I was already slightly... because you do need to understand that there isn't a direct connotation between Apollo and Apollyon as an entity. The best I could come up with back in the day was that, as we know, everything is double-edged. There's a dark side and a light side. So perhaps what we're looking at with the swastika. Swastika represented life, the sun, inverted, destruction. Same with Apollo. If you could, and this again, it's not in stone, it's not concrete. Because when you get into the etymology of it, there isn't actually a connection between Apollo and Apollyon. Apollo, as we understand it, is the sun, the might of the sun, creativity, music, everything that goes with, and healing. Okay? Now, Apollyon is specifically destruction. Yeah, that's all it is. Now, we could say then that there's two sides to Apollo. Apollo the healer, the giver of good things and life and everything that we associate with sunlight. And then its negative side would be absolute and utter destruction. So let's look at it in that way and say that that's the only interconnection you can actually really find in etymology between Apollo and Apollyon. There actually isn't one. It comes in all the translations between the Greek and the Hebrew and blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, it isn't fixed. It's just conjecture. And people have accepted it. So we need to first see in that sense. Okay, so not everything Apollo is necessarily the destruction side. So with that in mind, I'll just... okay, let's have a look at you because you've got a lot to say what it looks like. June says good evening all, good evening to you. June, Jay says good day, Jay, you are up early again, good man. Untitled says good evening all, good evening to you. Lex Smart says, Sean Boyle, evening from the old Welsh valleys. Hey, how are you doing, me old China? Good stuff, good stuff. Solver Mist says hello, Solver Mist. Paul says good evening, Sean and fellow members of the Old Wise Asylum. Public Notice has some grapes there, fat lad. We like that. PY Music says evening all, good evening to you, Paul. Public Notice, you are not at Creamfields. I love that. You're quite right, and you do need to stick it in logic and sort it out. Truth is sovereign, Ashon and all. Good evening to you. Untied says good rave, so he's on the raving as well. We have a ghost and some 3 John Travoltas, or John Revolting as he's known up there in Hollywood. Lex Smart says no set. Oh, that's me being naughty, and I got told off there. So yeah, we sorted that. Bingo. That's where we got to, and that's cracking. Good. I use only cash, says Mew. Only online do I use a card. Good, but think in terms of this. Remember, the carbon stuff that they're going to bring in is going to be weighing up you. Meat consumption, but more importantly, your fuel consumption. That's gas, that's electric. Yeah, can you see why they want you to pay a card all the time? It's essential to measure your carbon footprint. So if anything, you know, if you're still born idle and you can't get your fat ass off the old settee, at least think in terms of do not buy anything that's adding to the carbon by electronic means. Ta-da! There you go. So if you want to do gas electric, you're back to get your own, get there. Your meters out, get them wrote to, tell them to come collect them, get your own meters in. I mean, ultimately, it'd be good to let them come in and black them off. But make sure that you can't take your main fuse. That belongs to the property. It doesn't belong to them. Only the tails for the electric and the meter belongs to the actual company, the energy company. Let them come in, let them take it out. Once that's done, contract's over, you can do what you wish. Put your own meter in. Sorted. You're not stealing. It's a prepaid system. So that's the way to settle that. But more importantly, cash for your fuel, cash for your food. Because every bit of food has got a carbon count. Which, of course, when you reckon the catching shrimps off Blighty, taking them to Holland, packing them, sending them off to China, then they're being repackaged and then sent all the way back here, that's a big carbon footprint, isn't it? Just for a shrimp that you can pick up outside on promenade. That's the game they're playing. That's why they're doing it this way. So it has a huge carbon footprint, especially if it's meat. Because they don't want you eating meat, do they? They don't want you to die. And again, this vegan stuff is another part of destroying chromosome 8, which I failed to say. Oh no, I did. We got onto it. Is what they've determined to be your connection to the idea of a mightier force than you down here in this third dimension in your little avatar. Jace says, I won't use a cash machine, withdraw from the post office and only use cash always. But a cash machine's fine. You know, all that's being collected is data that you do cash out. So it doesn't actually matter. A human won't refuse to dispense your money. Well, that's fine. I mean, whichever way you get it, as long as you... What I'm saying is, the trick is, every time you spend cash, there's no trail. There's no measure for carbon footprints, etc., etc. I get customers to pay me cash, they don't like it, and then they don't work for it. Yeah, I mean, I'm saying I'm always going for cash if I can. But most people these days don't want to do that. And I'm not going to argue with them. You know what I'm saying? But that's payment. I'm talking about what you spend. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, buying your materials on is much better than coming in with £2 grand's worth of bare notes. But I'm talking about specifically carbon footprint stuff. Think about it in those terms. Peace to the gods, says public notice. Peace to the gods, indeed. Anita says hi. Hello, Anita. David Gray, good evening all. And we've got a beverage. And we've got some gigs on the old emoji with a smile. You pick good evening, afternoon, morning, and we're clapping hands. Right, it's morning for old Jace, and nearly bedtime for Moo. Treen says hi, Sean, folks. Hello, Treen. It's evening here in Drizzy, Scotland. What's happened to your sunshine? You're not squeezing them aggies enough. Get them aggies out and get them squeezed. David gets word in Scotland, says Treen. Somebody's missing 15 minutes. That's alright, we don't mind. David says he's in Fife. Happy Kingdom, says David. Mugshot of Trump this week, hilarious. I mean, it's just fucking ridiculous, let's be honest, guys. Come on, where's his little plate like the rest of them have? Why all of a sudden is Trumpet just looking mean and moody, but he's not. He's got the... Well, they can't do that, can they? Because he's going to come in as a great hero. So, they say. A bird has both left and right wing, but attached to the same bird exactly. Two cheeks to the same ass. Yep. It's a nice ass. A bird, yep, Papa Dom on the moon now. I mean, I've been taking piss all week on Twitter, but you know what? I think they're blocking it. And I've got it's on one of image setups that I'm going to put up for you tonight, but a translucent moon. The moon is translucent, folks. In old school, they called it the lesser light. The sun was called, I don't know, the greater light, something like that anyway. But the moon was known as the lesser light. There's nothing there. It's a fucking picture. There's somebody out somewhere behind some curtains with a fucking big projector, sticking that up there like that. Never moves. Never fucking moves. That's garbage. Everything moves out there, doesn't it? If it's not spinning, it's whizzing up and down, backwards and forwards, doing its little lighty type stuff. Because you think about it, all of them gods up there, which are the planets, that's what they're all based on, are doing a lot of courting. There's a lot of rape, courting, all sorts of shenanigans going on up there with them gods. They have a good time. They have a good time. All getting ready for Ragnarok. This was the idea of Swiss indoor. Of Swiss indoor. Okay. God says, oh, we've got the alien hand, we've got a square laughing and a pink hand with some pink dots coming out. Some pink. Oh, we're white and pink. I've got him. And green if we turn into the Hulk. Got you. I'm getting your symbolism now, cos you've been sussed. Prices going back up, are they really? Winding right direction, I can hear green fields. The shouting food causes cognitive decline. It do. Everything, you've really got to mitigate. But that's the thing, it's mitigation. You can't do any more than mitigation, can you? So for instance, I watched some of I put something on Facebook actually, a young lad, pretty much showing you what chlorine does when it's added to water. And he says your skin soaks it in, which it does, but not to the degree that I think the picture in your mind would come up, because your skin's there actually to protect you. So it doesn't necessarily absorb everything into the skin beneath, but if you've got sores, you've got open wounds, it's going to do that very thing. So I can't get away from that, because I'm not in a position to do anything about that. I have to have a shower in the water they supply. But I don't drink the shit. I don't drink brews. I do not drink tap water unless I'm visiting somebody. And because I have it very rarely, it's not really end up well for me to have one or two. But that's how I mitigate it. You know, everybody just, you know, think, oh, I can't do that, I need this, and I can't do it. No, that just stops you from doing anything. Just look at it practically and say, well, what can I do to mitigate what's happening right now? And then take it from there. That's how I do it, you know. So, for instance, Wednesday, I picked up the lurgy that's going around everywhere, that they're all terrified, trying to terrify people of. So Wednesday, I knew I had it. I could sense it in the back of my throat. By Thursday afternoon, I were having a throat come on. So I thought, right, sod this. So this is what, it's not medical advice, this is what I did in order to deal with this lurgy. And so I got my bicarbonate soda out, I snorted up each nostril, filled my nasal cavity with bicarbonate soda, and then I gargled the same bicarbonate soda. But the beauty with the bicarbonate is you can swallow it, and thus throw it all the way down the esophagus and right down your pipes into your tummy, because bicarb in your tummy is good for it as well. So it's win-win with that. Now, fair play, by Thursday evening the throat was bad, and I thought to myself, this is going to be a bad one. And so then I moved on to the lemons, so fresh lemon, cut up, red hot water, and then what I do is burn it, I scald it so that it gets all the shit off, and then the lemon can act on the bacteria. To be honest, it didn't seem to work, and when I went to bed at night and it worked, I thought, ooh, this is going to be a bad one in the morning. So I prepped myself for that, and I kept waking up in the night, maybe 5 or 6 times, with a big bowl in my throat. Then I had to go to the toilet and get rid. And pissing as well, a lot of pissing going on, so we're obviously getting stuff out. So there we are, I thought, hey, it's going to be a bit of a dodgy one this. Anyway, I got up in the morning, throat were absolutely fine. So that I kicked that ass. And it's a very mild flu. It's only mild. It's not, you can sense the symptoms of it all. You know, the eyes, sockets, if you like, you know, you want to rub them out. Last couple of days I felt a little bit weak, you know, bony. But it's very mild. And today I can say, basically, apart from snot, it's gone. So, nothing to worry about, to be quite honest. It if you act on it in the way you feel best. So I wouldn't get too excited about it, to be honest. It's a very mild flu in truth. To the point you think it's bacterial and just a cold, but it did get that fluey feeling in the old bones a bit, so I don't know. With cash, you're still paying tax, which funds criminals. Well, again, mitigation. You can't solve everything, so solve what you can. That way, you're actually doing something productive, not just saying, "Oh, well, I can't do it until I win the lottery." You know what I mean? That's where most people are. Yeah, I'll do everything. I'll do everything I know that's right, but I've just got to wait till I win the lottery. Yeah, okay. You know, someone said the sun is flat. Well, if they're lights, you know, what are they exactly? Portholes, I'd say. I think they're portholes. Some description, bringing in certain energies. You know, old school stuff said we're moon food. So, and this moon arrived. It wasn't there all the time. It arrived at some point in the time, and has been causing havoc ever since. Will there be another lock-in in September? If you let it. Decent filter will fit on the shower head. I'm not sure how to deal with the chlorine though, to be honest. Like smart cheap online, okay. Well, reverse osmosis is the trick, isn't it? So, sea salt and water. I drank a pint of seawater and was sick. Well, that's the thing. So, you don't actually need to make yourself sick unless you've got a problem in your stomach. Then you need to get it out. But with bicarb, you can happily eat the stuff. It's not going to do you any harm. It'll only do you good. I've been trying methylene blue. I don't know what that is. We'll have to keep us informed on how that pans out in the old China. Right, to business, otherwise, because there's a lot to cover tonight. Right. Donald Trump, allegiance to the sun god Apollo by Jeremy James. Also, the wealthy high flyers in the public sphere in the US have until recently been required to show some kind of connection to Christianity. They hate having to do this, but it provides them with an essential smokescreen, a social disguise which deflects the vast majority from asking the most obvious question. What do these guys really believe? Do they believe in God or in one of many gods? Even though a large percentage of the ultra-rich and political power brokers are Freemasons, it does not occur to most people to ask what this means in spiritual terms. The Masons have long projected the notion that they follow the Bible and that Freemasonry is compatible with Christianity. They have continued to do this with notable success, even though numerous books have become available in recent years, which prove beyond all doubt that Freemasons, particularly those at the higher levels, despise Christianity and reject outright the idea that Jesus was Christ, the Son of God. Well, that's not true, is it? Because it's the Scottish Rite Freemasons. Now, whether the York Rite Freemasons have now jumped on that because of the speculative masonry side of it, because it meant spot do leaks, quite possible. You look at the Duke of Kent, and he does look like a bit of a fruitcake up there on Carrot Cape Mountain. Let's be honest, he does, doesn't he? So he's probably the kind of guy that'll enjoy not being of the old tradition. The gods of Freemasonry are the gods of ancient Egypt. The gods of Freemasonry are the gods of ancient Egypt: Osiris, Horus, Isis, Anubis, and the rest. Well, Solomon's their main job. They're building Solomon's temple. That's the reality of it. We have shown this over and over again in previous papers. They also worship corresponding personae and the pantheons of Greece and Rome deities such as Apollo, Helios, Hermes, Mercury, Zeus, Jupiter, Aphrodite, Venus, Artemis, Diana, Athena, Minerva, because Athena is Minerva, Eros, Cupid, Night, Victoria, and so on. Now, we don't need to go through all this. President Trump seems to have made a virtue of not being, as far as anyone can tell, a member of a secret society. But this is just a pause. There are many occult secret societies whose membership is never disclosed. For example, many high-ranking members of the elite are Rosicrucians, but their affiliation is never revealed, and that's correct. You see, I had it down back in the day when I used to study this. So the Rosicrucians were actually the esoteric inner circle of what we call Freemasonry. But that's conjecture on my part. And there we have a Rosicrucian temple at Oceanside in California. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, the third highest political office in the United States, made the following significant statement during an interview on Fox News on the 3rd of March 2016. Now they're faced, or quote, now they're faced with the very real prospect of Donald Trump becoming the leader of the party, and it absolutely drives them crazy. Because he's an outsider. He's not them. He's not part of the club. He's uncontrollable. He hasn't been through the initiation rites. He didn't belong to the secret society. Now notice they said the secret society, and take note that we're speaking specifically of the United States. It says most commenters thought he was saying that Trump never belonged to any secret society, but that's not what he said. The secret society to which he was referring was the infamous Skull and Bones at Yale, chapter 322 of the German lodges, set up by Charles Taze Russell, who set up the Jehovah's Witnesses. His grandfather was the very guy that set up Skull and Bones at Yale as a chapter of the German lodge system. The one to which some recent US presidents and presidential candidates belong, so the Bushes and John Kerry, to name a few. Trump was not initiated into the Skull and Bones, but there are other esoteric groups to which he could conceivably belong. One only has to look for the evidence, and it's there. Now, this is interesting, because what I'm trying to get across here is how they're all pissing in the same pot. Alright, all of them. It says, chart, the royal families of the US are direct descendants of English and Scottish royalty. The genealogy below shows the bloodline connection between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And this comes through John of Gaunt. First Duke of Lancaster was born in 1340, and he was the son of King Edward III and father of King Henry IV. A small number of interconnected royal families rule America and pass the presidency back and forth between them. Now, just the first point to know when it comes to John of Gaunt. Right? Now, John of Gaunt's father and his brothers were on full-on gingers. Full-on ginger nuts. Right? Swirling ginger hair. But this, of course, is John of Gaunt. Very dark, sinister guy, born in Ghent, over there in Europe, and said to be born to one of his father's mistresses. Okay. So when he comes, now there is just a little bit more to be known about this fella. Let me just bump that over, and that is, this is President Trump's royal ancestry, Denmark and Scotland. It says Mr. Trump is a descendant of King Christian I of Denmark, Norway and Sweden. Trump can also trace his ancestry to the Scottish royalty. Christian I of Denmark was the father of Queen Margaret of Scotland, the spouse of King James IV of Scotland. Their son King James IV of Scotland is also Mr. Trump's forefather. Trump's royal British ancestors have been reported on earlier, and Trump and his Democratic opponent Hillary Clinton are related through a common ancestor, John of Gaunt, son of King Edward III. Now, King Edward I was an interesting guy. He got the all the the hoity-toity, sword fencing, all that, like what do they call it, chivalry. He put the chivalry side of it all together. But more importantly, Edward III refused. He refused the title of Holy Roman Emperor. How fantastic is that? How many people are going to not want that? That's because the Holy Roman Empire didn't really have the affiliations to the Christian Arthurian chivalric system that Edward III was setting up. So that's interesting to know. He refused the title. So John of Gaunt and Catherine Swineford, who herself is rather dubious as to her origins. Okay. So first Duke of Lancaster and Duchess of Lancaster. I've got to remember I live in Lancaster, Lancashire. So this is my gig. This is my turf. And this is what's been going down while I were here. Now, so Joan Beaufort, and you've got John Beaufort, you've got Eleanor Percy, so the Percys, the big Northumbrian mighty Percys. Henry Percy, he was quite a geezer, to be honest. John Stewart, Margaret Gascoigne, Elizabeth Stewart, blah blah blah. We got the Gordons, the Mackays, the Monroes. Now we get into Margaret Rodham, D. Grey. So she was originally a Grey. married into Rodham. You've got John Rodham, blah blah. They like Johns. Then you got Joseph, Jonathan Rodham, Joseph Blah, Jonathan Blah, Hugh Simpson, blah blah blah, and there you have the crazy cow herself. But from the other side, yeah, Catherine Swine, Anna Monroe, McKay, MacLeod, of the Clan MacLeod. You know, we did that little gig, didn't we, about Conor MacLeod? Get running around and say you can all be only one and all that. And explain to my mate that the origin of the kilt. Remember that. So it was the clouds that gave us that information. And then of course you've got Donald John Trump Senior. Bottom. So there's interconnection. Same bloodlines, all bullshit and garbage and fish. And there is actually a couple of videos out there that show that they're actually bestie mates. You know, when they're up at that big Holy See yearly get together that they all have to piss out of each other and slap each other on the back at the same time. So Edward III, interesting character. Let me just check. Are you seeing this? Yeah, you're seeing that. Born November 1312 at Windsor in Berkshire, England, and died 21st June 1377 at Sheen in Surrey. King of England from 1327 to 1377. So this guy had a long time, and he put together pretty much everything we see as English history. And he led the England in the 100 Years' War with France. The descendants of his 7 sons and 5 daughters contested the throne for generations, climaxing the War of the Roses. I mean, this was just bloodline wars. It's a big fantasy, the way they presented it. And the eldest son of Edward II is who he was, and Isabella of France. Edward III was summoned to Parliament as Earl of Chester in 1320 and was made Duke of Aquitaine in 1325. But contrary to tradition, he never received the title of Prince of Wales. Now that would be interesting. He grew up amid struggles between his father and a number of barons who were attempting to limit the king's power and to strengthen their own role in governing England. His mother, repelled by her husband's treatment of the nobles and disaffected by the confiscation of her English estates by his supporters, played an important role in this conflict. In 1325 she left England to return to France to intervene in a dispute between her brother Charles IV of France and her husband over the latter's French possessions, Guyane and Gascony, and Ponthieu. Oh, my French is well shit. Je m'appelle, that's about it. She was successful. The land was secured for England on condition that the English king pay homage to Charles. This was performed on the king's behalf by his young son. The heir apparent was secured at his father's side, or his mother's side rather, with Roger Mortimer, an influential baron who had escaped to France in 1323 and had become a lover. Isabella now began preparations to invade England to depose her husband. To raise funds for this enterprise, Edward III was betrothed to Philippa, daughter of William, Count of Hainault and Holland. Within 5 months of the invasion of England, the Queen and nobles who had made much popular support overpowered the king's forces, and Edward VII, charged with incompetence and breaking his coronation, was forced to resign. Coronation no. And on January 29, 1327, Edward III, aged 14, was crowned King of England. During the next 4 years, Isabella and Mortimer governed in his name, though nominally his guardian was Henry, Earl of Lancaster. In the summer of 1327, he took part in an abortive campaign against the Scots, which resulted in the Treaty of Northampton, making Scotland an independent realm. Edward was deeply troubled by the settlement and signed it only after much persuasion by Isabella and Mortimer. He married Philippa at York on January 24, 1328, soon after Edward made a successful effort to throw off his degrading dependence on his mother and Mortimer. While the council was being held in Nottingham, he entered the castle by night through a subterranean passage, took Mortimer prisoner and had him executed in November 1330. Edward had discreetly ignored his mother's liaison with Mortimer and treated her with every respect, but her political influence was at an end. Edward III now began to rule as well as to reign. Younger, ardent and active, he sought to remake England into a powerful nation it had been under Edward I. He still resented the concession of independence made to Scotland by the Treaty of Northampton. The death of Robert I, the Bruce, King of Scotland, in 1329 gave him a chance of retrieving his position, Well, of course, Robert the Bruce represented the Belgian Dutch bunch, or that aristocracy. So that was the real battle between England and Europe. The new King of Scots, his brother-in-law David II, was a mere boy, and Edward took advantage of his weakness to aid the Scottish barons who had been exiled by Bruce to place their leader Edward Balliol on the Scottish throne. David II fled to France, but Balliol was despised as a puppet of the English king, and David returned in 1341. Now, we don't really need to go into that, but there's some interesting data just a little bit further down here. Now, so Edward had, the Black Prince was Edward's eldest, but he actually died, which is another. It seems to happen that their eldest dies, and then in comes something that's not really supposed to be there. And that's where John the Gaunt came in. He basically was running the next king, as it were. But just let me have a. There were some interesting stuff. I mean, obviously I'll put these up so you can have a little look yourself. But there's just this. Here we go. Is this here? So they're fighting over. They're fighting over France, basically. So there's a lot of battles going on. He's trying to get his French stuff. Blah 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 blah. So look, so when the French King Charles V, son of John II, repudiated the Treaty of Calais, Edward resumed the title of King of France. But he showed little of his former vigour in meeting this new trouble, leaving most of the fighting and the administration of his foreign territories to his sons, Edward and John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, while they were struggling with little success against the rising tide of French national feeling. Edward's want of money made him a willing participant in the attack on the wealth and privileges of the church. Meanwhile, Aquitaine was gradually lost. Prince Edward returned to England in broken health in 1371, and John of Gaunt's march through France from Calais to Bordeaux in 1373 achieved nothing. Edward's final attempt to lead an army abroad himself in 1372 was frustrated when contrary winds prevented his landing his troops in France. In 1375, he was glad to make a truce, which lasted until his death. By it, the only important possessions remaining in English hands were Calais, Bordeaux, Bayonne and Brest. Edward was now sinking into his dotage. After the death of Queen Philippa in 1369, so this is Edward III, he fell entirely under the influence of his greedy mistress, Alice Perrers, while Prince Edward and John of Gaunt became the leaders of sharply divided parties in the royal court and council. So there's division between Edward's son Edward and John of Gaunt. Wait a minute. So Edward now is getting influenced by this fleabag Alice Perrers, and Prince Edward and John of Gaunt became the leaders of sharply divided parties in the royal court. So the division's coming on now between John of Gaunt and who is looking like he wasn't really. He was a bit of a bastard kid, dark, not ginger. You can see that he's now being positioned into the heart of the British royalty. While Prince Edward and John of Gaunt became the leaders of sharply divided parties in the royal court and council, John of Gaunt returned to England in April 1374 and, with the help of Alice Perrers, obtained the chief influence with his father. So through her, John became the man. Yeah, always outsiders. But his administration was neither honourable nor successful. At the famous so-called Good Parliament of 1376, popular indignation against John of Gaunt's ruling party came at last to a head. Alice Perrers was removed and some of Gaunt's followers were impeached. Before the Parliament had concluded its business, however, the death of Prince Edward, June the 8th, robbed the Commons of its strongest support. John of Gaunt regained power, and the acts of the Good Parliament had been reversed when Edward III died. So here you come, you can see this. John of Gaunt is an imposter kind of guy, and that's who Trump and Clinton are both related to. Now, Edward's character. Edward III possessed extraordinary vigour and energy of temperament. He was an admirable tactician and a consummate knight. His court was the most brilliant in contemporary Europe, and he was himself well fitted to be the head of the gallant knights who obtained fame in the French wars. Though his main ambition was military glory, he was not a bad ruler of England, being liberal, kindly, good-tempered and easy of access. His need to obtain supplies for carrying on the French wars made him favourable to his subjects' petitions and contributed to the growing strength of Parliament. His weak points were his wanton breaches of good faith, his extravagance, his frivolity, and his self-indulgence. His ambition ultimately transcended his resources, and before he died, even his subjects sensed his failure. Let me have a go. What we're looking at here. We don't want to look at Alexander the Great. So that just gives you an insight into where Trump, Clinton, same American elites, all have their bases here in Scotland. And we can see that division. You've got the monarchies of England, you've got the Scottish Rite system, the Whigs, the Presbyterians, pushing in always. And the Civil War would make it look like you'd got rid of the Scottish side, but not quite. What actually happened is they brought in the full-blown force from Europe that the Scottish Rite, the Presbyterians, actually represented. And that was the aristocrats of Belgium and big parts of Germany. So that, again, you can see your Prussians, all this stuff. This is what we're looking at. And Blenheim Palace is looking today as their seat. And today, it's still obviously, it's more like just a showpiece. It's not actually the power, because that's now in Washington or in the United States. And they're just tossing around with old Blighty here, ensuring that we're replaced. Why they're doing I don't know, but that's been carried out since Victoria, especially under Elizabeth, and this Johnny come lately, this acclaimed fake king and his son, intending to expand that nonsense. So let's not hold any hope in the garbage that we've got going down at the moment, if you get my meaning. Right, so that just gives you an insight into why I say this idea of white hats, black hats, the chessboard, that neither of the incumbent hero and demons are actually in opposition. They're all banging each other stupid in both holes. The Ring of Solomon and the honeypot. So that's the game, that's the gig, and we're going to get now to have a look at what it is. What is the theology that's grabbed these people over these last couple of centuries? Well, actually, beginning under John Dee and Edward Kelly. Interesting characters. We have discussed them before on live streams, so I know we didn't go into great depth about it. But, you know, if you've been listening, you've been following this stuff, it'll prick your ears up, and I'm pretty sure you'll start to remember one or two things. Now, what we're actually going to do now is we're going to go through a video. I'm not going to show the video because I don't want to breach copyright or any such thing. It's not on YouTube, so I don't think we're going to come in any problem. But this information is very important, and it's a book been written by a guy. Where have I got that written down? I have wrote it down somewhere, but I am crap sometimes. Right, I can't remember his name, but we will get into that, because I don't want to. I want this guy to be known. He's a good guy, and he makes a lot of sense. So, as I said, I'll give you a little. I'll let you see the video just so you can see what you're looking at. But then we'll switch that off, so you can't see it, but you can hear it. I'll break off now and again. But I've put quite a few images together that are quite in sync with what he's saying. They might not come in order that he's talking about it, but it's all part of what he's saying, just to give you an idea. But if you've studied the works of Aleister Crowley, the life of Aleister Crowley, what he actually was, you're going to know a lot of this anyway, but there's going to be quite a bit of it that you don't know as well. So it's well worth get a brew, sit back and relax and take this in, because this is exactly what's happened. And just going back to what I said about watching that video of Blenheim this week, this is what we need to understand. It's what they need to understand too, because they really did look like they didn't have a clue what was going on outside of it just being a birthday gig. Yet you could see that there were players in there pulling them all in, keeping all the wealth, keeping it together, moving for this agenda. Now then, we're on. So, see, we have looked at this before on one of the live streams, but it's quite important that we look at it again. Because what was set up originally with the Virginia Company, the Levant Company, weren't actually imperial in nature. They were actually just trading blocks. It was when enter the last of the Magi, as he's been described, John Dee, that it all changed into something completely different. So when we have, like I said, we've gone through that. Now there he is, Bob Osborne, and he's written a book, Zennor, The Spirit of Place, Part 3. Now Zennor is in Cornwall. It's a moor, and a very powerful place known for the ley line system. And there has been battles over controlling it and utilising it, and that's the basis of what he's saying. We're now at part 3, so I'm going to have to look at other ones if he's done other interviews with this guy. So the interview is Bob Osborne. Is it? No, wait a minute. No, it is Bob Osborne that's doing this, and I forgot who the interviewer is, so my apologies to the interviewer. But I'm sure you're going to be happy that we're helping you along with this, because this is really important data. So chaps, as I said, I'll take the video side off and we'll just listen to what this guy has to say.
So I've done quite a lot of research on Crowley, and I don't really know where to start. But all I can say is this is probably one of the most remarkable characters of the 20th century, with a whole host of talents that any one of those activities, you would think they were just, to do what he did in many fields, it elevates him really to magician status. Because briefly, Cambridge University, a top mountaineer, he actually climbed K2, and he went on he had a misadventurous climbing of K2, because the people he went climbing with, he didn't take any oxygen. He was one of the top climbers in the country, and he also climbed with George Mallory, who subsequently died on Everest. And George Mallory was connected to the Boomsby world that was very much connected with D.H. Lawrence and the people I was researching at the time. So researching all these people, Crowley kept coming up and up and up all the time. So the mountaineering, he climbed Everest. His guides and his followers all perished. Crowley didn't go back for them. He left them to die, because he was going to achieve his objective. He was also a grandmaster at chess. He, as a kid, would go into chess tournaments, play grandmasters, and whoop them. He also was able to decode Enochian magic, which is a very arcane, very mysterious belief system, and he seemed to think he had the key to unlocking Enochian magic, and certainly the rituals that he performed. Secret society that was around that time, starting with the German intelligence, MI5, MI6. Also, he infiltrated a lot of occult societies, including the Golden Dawn, the OTO, which was a German branch of Freemasonry that was very active around that time. Espionage activities. All governments, deny that he was working for them, but I have uncovered a lot of evidence about his work with MI5 and MI6 leading up to the war, and the massive influence he had on the counterculture movement through his own experiments with hallucinogenic drugs, of which he took everyone known to man. There's a photo here, Miles. His first novel was called Diary of a Drug Fiend. Yeah, I actually love this photo for many reasons. This was Crowley's first published novel, Diary of a Drug Fiend. Says what it does on the tin, and I think this photograph was taken when he was actually climbing K2. Clearly lost a lot of weight, and he, apart from his climbing activities and his occult opening of portals, deep knowledge of black magic and Enochian magic, he actually believed that he was the reincarnation of Edward Kelly. Now, Edward Kelly was the scryer or the medium that was used by John Dee. And John Dee was Queen Elizabeth's magician back in Elizabethan times. Magicians, occultists were very common in the court, so they used to employ them to help them in their psychic warfare. So John Dee was involved in psychic warfare, employed by Francis Walsingham, who was probably the first head of the equivalent of what's called MI5 now, which was set up in Elizabethan times, running spies, occultists. So Kelly was an Irishman who many thought was a charlatan, but John Dee recognised that he could open up channels, and he had a scrying device which was crystal. So he could open up other worlds, other entities, and drag them in. That traces back to the fallen angels and Enochian magic. So Kelly also had a very dark side, as did Crowley, because Kelly practiced black magic. He used to dig up bodies and practice necromancy. So John Dee, who was...
This is something associated with Jimmy Savile. What's the purpose of that?
Yeah, Jimmy Savile was also an occultist, and from what I can gather, had complete protection of the secret services, because a lot of occultists, they use sexual abuse to summon entities. It links in a bit to Baphomet worship, child sacrifice. So Savile was a necromancer, and I, like most people, I've no interest in shagging dead people, but I think they use these extreme sexual practices, which Crowley was certainly documented and popularised, as a form of channeling entities that can come in, and also it's connected to Kundalini, which is connected to the chakra system. So by engaging in necrophilia, or in Freemasonry terms, it could be the Ring of Solomon, and people that are Freemasons that are abducting or having sexual practices with children. This sounds pretty grisly, but the best time to capture adrenochrome, or capture the energy, is with a boy, an innocent boy of about 7 years old, and they would then extract their adrenochrome, which is a modern day version of this thrill or this latent energy that a lot of, especially aging control freaks, would use, and unfortunately a lot of members of the English establishment and members of various high up Freemasonry groups are followers of Crowley, because he was an expert in these dark arts.
Dark arts. Huh? So this is why Crowley is basically revered by these people, because it's all about expressing your will. Miles Johnson says, Hillary, of the Basis Project. Thanks for that, Hillary. Thank you very much for that. Now, I broke it down into parts. Obviously, I'm going to put the video up for you to watch, but I would strongly suggest you watch it all, because it's very difficult to work out which parts to miss out, because it's just so good. He's so on the ball, this guy, in my opinion, of course. And you've got to understand, I studied this stuff for a very long time back in the day in that mystery school. 7 full years on this stuff, and then another 7 years, but slowly moving away from this after I'd left the clutches. But this is basically the stuff that I was studying, as well as a lot of other things. But you enter this game at your peril, and I entered it, and it doesn't come without a cost. I had to do drastic things in order to get out, and I mean drastic, that make your eyes water. But ultimately, that doesn't really matter. But I suppose what I'm saying is, unless you are so strong as a character in yourself, you should never go anywhere near that that stuff, because it's jingle jangle, and you will get stuck on the jingle jangle. If you don't have a really powerful conscience that you listen to and accept as your guiding principle, and an exceptionally strong sense of self, keep well away from this stuff, because I'm a strong character and I have an exceptionally strong of self, but even that wasn't enough back then to prevent some very nasty things from taking place. I'd dealt with it afterwards, but it would have been much better if I hadn't have had to have dealt with it. Let's be quite frank. So, you know, I'm putting this guy on, saying to you, this guy knows what he's talking about, because this is basically the gig.
So his first novel, Diary of a Drug Fiend, was when he was starting to perform sex rituals, and also he was one of the really pioneers of how you can use hallucinogenic drugs to tap into altered states of consciousness. I mean, this is why he's such an important figure in the counterculture movement, and certainly not just like the rock stars, many of whom are absolutely obsessed with Crowley, including, you know, Jimmy Page, who bought his properties, and David Bowie was a follower of Crowley. Mick Jagger, of course, you know, Sympathy for the Devil was about Crowley. Lots of poets, lots of artists have channeled Crowley's energy, channeled his knowledge, and used it for other purposes, including myself. So when he wrote Diary of a Drug Fiend, he had been in one of his communes, links into the research I did on D.H. Lawrence's commune, here where I live in Tregurthen. He had a commune in Sicily called the Abbey of Thelema. So Crowley's religion, which was his own made-up religion, was called Thelema. And Thelema means, in his terms, it means will. So effectively, this derives from a German philosopher called Schopenhauer, who was very influential. And the thesis is that by exerting your will and by developing the power of your will, you can manifest reality, and you can also be more powerful than the other forces that are against you. So Crowley's Thelema was a religion that was adopted by lots of occultists, lots of people who wanted to. It's very much a New World Order philosophy, and the Thelema keeps cropping up time and time again. He wanted to overtake Russia because he, with the collapse of Russia with the Bolsheviks, which was a Fabian coup, he wanted to impose his own religion on Christianity. So Crowley's idea, I mean, he did everything on a large scale, let's put it that way. His projects were shit or bust. So he wanted his religion, Thelema, to be the new religion that brings in the Aeon of Horus, which is where we are now in Crowley's terms. So any means to promote the synthesis or the awakening or the channeling of extraterrestrial or demonic or alien powers that he needed, he had various rituals in order to bring this about. So he formed a commune in Sicily, incidentally, where Lawrence also spent time, in the Abbey of Thelema. So the Abbey of Thelema, he went there with his then girlfriend, Leah Hersig. Crowley, along with a lot of people who have belief systems related to channeling the powers of gods or goddesses, including Robert Graves, who I talked about earlier, you know, summoning muses through the goddess, but Graves did it not in a dark way, but Crowley, everything was inverted because Crowley wanted to replace, part of the philosophy of Thelema was that you replace God with man. Now, this also relates to the Huxleys, the Darwins, the Bertrand Russells of this world, in that we're moving into the new stage where man becomes God. So channeling people like Friedrich Nietzsche, a lot of German philosophers, you know, were into this, Schopenhauer. So he formed this abbey in Thelema, and he had the privilege of being kicked out of Sicily by Benito Mussolini, because whatever Crowley got up to, he always ended up getting absolutely, evicted from countries. I mean, in this abbey, he was running. Someone died after he sacrificed a cat, and he would get his acolytes to drink cat's blood. I mean, he clearly was a sadistic psychopath, but he did have incredible mind control skills. So he would always have females who he would call them his scarlet women. So Crowley used to see women as avatars of Babylon. So when he talks about his women, he would call them his scarlet women. And he wrote a poem for Leah Herzig, 666 word poem, and the sexual practices that they engaged in, he would always draw other people into it. It was like one big massive satanic swinging party, and a lot of the people that he drew into his sexual orgies and his drug taking were members of the elites, many of whom were either high up politicians or intellectuals or general addicts. So all the people that I have, some of the people that I've written about connected that ended up in Zeno, where I am, artists, were at the Abbey of Thelema. It gained a lot of notoriety. Mussolini kicked him out. That book he wrote, Diary Drug Fiend, it became a bit of one of those books, along with Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception, Robert Graves' White Goddess, similarly like works by D.H. Lawrence, including Lady Chatterley, Orwell's 1984, they became a bit of a template for the New World Order, the Aeon of Horus, the breaking away, the Age of Aquarius, which is a fake agenda. And Crowley was very much involved in bringing in these agendas, and he, in his own mind, he was bringing in the agendas that he was controlling and manipulating to become the emblem of the 20th century. Now, after he left Sicily, he was always travelling around. He was in New York, he was in Montauk, he was in Cornwall. He came down to climb in Cornwall near me at a place called Buzzerground Cliffs. His first real involvement with Zeno, as far as I can gather, was in the 1930s. Actually, we need to talk about the commune with Lawrence and Frida, the Baphomet thing. The particular link between Crowley and D.H. Lawrence and the counterculture movement that I was fascinated by was the commune in Monverita in 1917, where Frida von Richthofen and many members of the German aristocracy and many great thinkers like Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud, Hermann Hesse, a lot of anarchists, a lot of occultists were in this commune. And one of the heads of it, heads of the German Freemasonry Society, which was called the OTO, which is the Orienti Templis Order, a lot of it was based on Tibetan spirituality, a mixture of Kundalini yoga to do with, the rising, controlling the chakras, directing energy through the chakras, through ritual. And the OTO was established at this commune in Ascona, which was the template for the commune that in 1916 and 1917 was established in Tregurthen, where I now live. So the Ascona commune, one of the agendas was to create communes throughout the world, to bring people into this almost like new age way of thinking, which was a bit of a trap. Theodor Reuss, who was head of the German Freemasonry, adopted Crowley's religion, which was the Thelemic religion, and this became the official religion of the OTO. So at that time, I think this was 1917, this photograph here, you can see Crowley in his, he was a Grand Master of many Freemasonry lodges. He managed to infiltrate the Golden Dawn, and he kicked W.B. Yeats out of that. The Golden Dawn was very much followers of Blavatsky's esoteric beliefs. He managed to get into Freemasonry lodges, secret societies somehow and take them over. And he actually took over. He became the UK representative for the OTO, which was a German Freemasonry lodge occult system that was based on ancient Bavarian practices. So in that photograph, he's named himself Baphomet. That was one of his names. Baphomet was the goat deity that the Knights Templars used to worship, and of course Baphomet is connected with androgyny. And Crowley was very interested in sex rituals that would synthesize the male and the female. The male and the female life force to create a separate life force, and of course this was all part of the transgender movement that was being created at that time in 1917 by the Fabians and by the various Freemasonry societies. So worship of Baphomet was effectively goat worship. Going forward, I was particularly interested in the rumours that Crowley had a child in Newlyn, which is very near to where I live in Zennor. And that he performed black magic rituals up on the moors at Zennor. I mean, these rumours have been rife for quite a long time. All the time that I've lived there was rumours, and there was an unfortunate and suspicious death of a prominent Fabian lady called Catherine Arnold Forster, who was married to William Arnold Forster, who was instrumental in setting up the League of Nations in a house called Eagle's Nest, which is my neighbouring house. At that time in the 30s, he also was instrumental in setting up Gordonstone School, which of course is a very the League of Nations, which led to the United Nations, again, based on the Lucis Trust, the Lucis belief system, which comes from Blavatsky and Alice Bailey and Crowley, very important figure for them. During that time, there was rumours that Haile Selassie was there in exile during the Second World War. Yes, he was. I've documented his time there. He was in exile. Haile Selassie was certainly a prominent Freemason I've forgotten African where he was.
I think you have a picture of him.
Yeah, I've got a picture of him on the beach. Picture of Haile Selassie on the beach with his wife in Cornwall, looking very very cold. Von Ribbentrop was a regular visitor to St Ives. And the death of Arnold Forster was something that people don't talk about because the connection with Crowley. So I wanted to get to the bottom of it. There's two previous people that have done research on Crowley's time here. One was a guy called Paul Newman, who wrote a book called The Tregurthan Horror, which was very good, by the way. But his research ran up against Stonewall because the mysterious death that he's talking about, the rumours or the folk stories were that this Fabian wanted to get Crowley out of Cornwall because they suspected he was running a witch's coven, and that he was also performing black magic rituals on Zennor moors. Now, the moors on Zennor, as I've discussed, Lawrence was tapping into this pagan energy, and clearly Crowley had a similar belief that you can draw energy out the granite, out of the stones, and the rituals or the sex rituals that were taking place up on the moors, of which the H. Lawrence was very interested and involved in. It was just one of those parts of the world where everything was right for him to set up a commune, and the commune that he had in a village called Mousehole. So I wanted to get to the bottom of the child that he had, because other people have complained claimed that they were Crowley's children. One called Amando claimed that Crowley created a portal from Zennor to Montauk and opened a portal in 1943 that led to the disastrous Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk project. So there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about Crowley, and of course the one that was the most interesting was that the Fabian Carl Arnold Forster was a very good friend of Virginia Woolf, local magistrate, asked the vicar of Zennor to get rid of Crowley and stop the black magic practices that were taken, because the little cottages around me were still inhabited by artists, many of whom were followers of the H. Lawrence or connections with the H. Lawrence, who were all involved with their own black magic rituals and occult practices and sex orgies and hallucinogenic drugs in these random isolated cottages where, in this little village in the middle of nowhere. So the rumour is that the vicar of Zennor threw holy water in Crowley's face, that he was summoning up demons, also in St Berrian churchyard, where later they filmed Straw Dogs and Bertrand Russell's granddaughter set herself on fire. There's connections there. But the particular moor is up above me, and there's an old cottage called Carn Cottage, which is extremely spooky. And this is where the death of this lady took place. And the rumour is that she was confronted with a Draco-reptilian creature that was 8 foot tall, horned wings, a bit like the Baphomet avatar, that Crowley had summoned, because Crowley didn't need to be in the place he was in to summon demons, because he was able to access other timelines, and he was one of the few people that could make himself invisible. H.G. Wells had written about this in The Invisible Man, and of course now the CIA already had that technology, which they certainly do now for the Men in Black to make themselves invisible. So there's witness statements about Crowley when he's in restaurants making himself visible, and if this was a remote killing, it kind of interested me. So when I started digging, I kind of solved the mystery. There was a coven in Mousehole that Crowley was running, but what he would do, quite apart from infiltrating occult societies with his extreme knowledge, and most people did fall under his spell, he had the ability of mesmerism, which was adopted by many psychiatrists at this commune in Montverite, including one called Otto Gross, and so certainly he had the ability to hypnotise people and mind control people, whether it's through ritual chanting or just the power of his will, which was his big thing. If your will is powerful, you can exert it on other people. So he created a commune in Mousehole that had an existing coven of witches that had been practicing there for a couple of 100 years in a place called Trevello Woods. Trevello Woods is a very spooky place, and it's also called King Arthur's Woods. So there's tables there where rumours were that witches traditionally performed sacrifices. Bodies would be, ritual sex acts would take place on bodies. Children would go missing. There was a lot of children going missing around this particular part of Cornwall. For there's history of this, and of course in Zennor, where I live, the myth of the mermaid of Zennor, where a child gets abducted by a mermaid and taken into the sea. The Cornish traditionally make fables and folk stories about these things, but I dare say these children that were going missing were involved in witchcraft, child abduction, and most of them were involved in decadent practices anyway, so they were easy pickings for someone as brilliant as him. And then of course he would blackmail them or exercise power over them. So Lord Tredegar used to have German Nazis coming over. I think Hess, Rudolf Hess came over at that time, and then of course there will be exchange parties going back to these German places, many of them in Bavaria. So the English aristocracy that were living in not only in Cornwall but other parts of secret societies that Crowley had infiltrated were involved in not only homosexual practices but sex rituals probably involving dead people and children. So this was rife all through the 30s, and Crowley did infiltrate a lot of secret societies. And the coven that he was running in Mousehole, it's really fortuitous, because I find through my links to the poetic intuition that the Graves used to tell me about, was that if you're a writer, an artist, and you're about to embark on a project, you can channel the information that you need and it will be provided to you. So when I came up against this wall of trying to find out about this coven, because nobody talks about covens in the part of Cornwall that I live in. In fact, I've stirred up quite a lot of, let's say, animosity by even bringing this subject up. I then got invited to dinner. There was rumours that Crowley had a child, and that Crowley's mistress at that time had involved in a ritual and was involved with his coven. So I started researching this, and everything fell into place. The child was called Ataturk. I know people that knew him. I know people, the people I befriended, the artists, the writers I befriended, knew nothing about Crowley's involvement in this world. Established a link between him, D.H. Lawrence, and Robin Thine. So there's a thing called the Mandrake Press, which was set up in 1929 by an Australian member of MI5 called Inky Stevenson. Inky Stevenson was responsible for publishing the banned erotic paintings of D.H. Lawrence. He was in partnership with a guy called Peter Warlock, who had been in the commune with Lawrence. So they formed the Mandrake Press also to publish all the works of Aleister Crowley that were banned. Crowley took over the Mandrake Press, then got exposed for his other activities. So at the same time as being an occultist and other skills, he was also a con man because he needed a constant supply of money. So when he wasn't funded by the British military intelligence, who clearly funded his activities in New York during the First World War, in Germany through the 30s, he seemed to be hanging out with Huxley. Hitler banned his paintings. He had exhibitions. His books were banned by the Nazis as soon as they found out his links, because effectively they were concerned about secret societies and Freemasonry. So Crowley had various schemes, one of which was to sell his own semen, which he called the elixir of rejuvenation. Crowley held a lot of store by his own virility, and at that time when he was younger, certainly he went through an awful lot of. He was clearly a sex addict, and along with all the the cocaine, the mescaline, and just every other drug that is known to man. So James McAlpine was killed in the Balkans on a spy mission. Pat Doherty went to work as a cipher clerk in Cairo, carrying on this work. And then moved back to Newlyn, and she then went and took to drinking drugs. So, but she was in this commune, which is Cobham, in 1938, along with other members of the community who I actually named, which didn't go down too well as well because two of them were running a bird hospital. So this was one of many commons that he'd set up, and the death at this same time when Haile Selassie was in Eagle's Nest, Ribbentrop was hanging around because Ribbentrop was doing deals with the Cornish about how this part of Cornwall was going to become integrated into the Fourth Reich. There were ley line wars with Himmler, with their Dowsers versus our Dowsers, and Crowley was involved in all these projects. So this death was investigated, but the whole information about it was closed down, and the Chief Inspector of Police, Colonel Prothero, researchers before me that have tried to find out about it have come against a brick wall. The people that were there were supposedly sent to an asylum. There was a young couple there called the Vaughans. Well, fortunately for me, the official narrative turned out to be a complete cover story because I actually tracked down the Vaughans, and by chance, one of the children of this guy, Gerald Vaughan, who was a follower of both Lawrence and Crowley, he came to stay in Zenor because he was a follower of D.H. Lawrence, and then he became a follower of Crowley. He was a very wealthy man. He inherited a lot of money, and he put all this money into the communes that he set up, one of which he set up in Encledra during the Second World War. We're talking about millions and millions of pounds here. And that was set up by the people that were involved in D.H. Lawrence's first commune. Various names. Pat Doherty had a very shady life. She married again rather mysteriously and then ended up in the house that I regularly go to visit, she would run it as an orphanage for African children. So African children will be in Mousehole, coming and going all the time. Supposedly the children of African diplomats who were too busy, so they would send them down to be foster mothered by Crowley's, the mother of Crowley's child and Crowley's mistress, and a member of a coven. So that was all rather mystery. I don't know what happened with that. I couldn't get any further with that. But I did establish Crowley's involvement with this.
Sorry about that. We're blowing my nose.
With the Fabian. Now the Fabians, from my point of view, saw both D.H. Lawrence and Aleister Crowley as threats. They like to control the agenda, so they controlled the agenda of Lawrence's writing through Frieder von Richthofen, and they could never really control Crowley. Crowley was an absolute maverick in everything he did. He seemed to be uncontrollable, and nobody knew who he was working for, who he was spying for, but he seemed to have levels of protection above what is normally provided to intelligence agencies of MI5 or MI6. So the whole network of the Intrepids, like the Ian Flemings of this world, the Maxwell Knights, who were all high up in the British military secret service. I mean, it goes through Dennis Wheatley, John le Carré, Roald Dahl. Most of those people also, having dug into the scurrilous activities involved with their private life. Ian Fleming shared an interest in flagellation. A lot of them, were also practicing occultists, also high-level Freemasons. So, to a certain extent, that whole network, Crowley established quite a lot of control of these people because I think he had a lot on them. Let's put it that way. And at the end of his life, he died in a nursing home in Hastings, and followers of Crowley at that time, towards the end of his life, carried on a lot of his work and openly admitted that they were developing the work of Crowley. For example, Aldous Huxley was massively instrumental in adopting Crowley's methods of Kundalini, through hypnotic drugs. Timothy Leary was a massive follower of Crowley, and Timothy Leary was instrumental via Huxley in setting up the hallucinogenic agenda that flooded universities in California at that time with LSD that was manufactured, after research by Tavistock Institute Sergeant. Also, Crowley set up lodges. Everywhere he went, he set up lodges and secret societies. He set up a lodge in Los Angeles called, I think it was the Agape Lodge. And the Agape Lodge was also, at that time, Crowley was like an underground rock star in many ways, as was D.H. Lawrence. I mean, they were held up to be, you can't get more counterculture than Crowley, really. So a lot of rock bands, like Jimmy Page and Zeppelin, he was buying all Crowley's houses, including Boleskine House in Loch Ness. And there's even rumours, rumours followed Crowley around that Loch Ness Monster was a monster that Crowley had summoned. You're getting into areas where it's difficult to distinguish between the legend and what actually took place. So Jimmy Page was also an occultist, and of course Boleskine House burnt down. Many members of the Led Zeppelin had tragedies. A couple of them said they didn't want anything else to do with Page's obsession with Crowley.
And not forgetting, who did they lose? The main man, John Bonham. That's what happens when you're playing around. But of course, when you get into that kind of thing and you're doing a deal with the devil, you will be asked, who are you going to sacrifice? How good is it?
You get songs like, the Stones were also very influenced by Crowley. So Kenneth Anger, who made the film Lucifer Rising, he visited Crowley's Abbey Thelema cottage later on in life and took some etchings off the wall that were put there when Crowley He made a film called Lucifer Rising, which was actually about Crowley and the Stones band. Sympathy for the Devil was about Crowley. David Bowie was a massive researcher of Crowley's practices. The list is endless, it really is. And the counterculture movement at that time, Crowley was involved with people like Annie Besant, who was instrumental, along with Huxley, in bringing people like Krishnamurti. What they would do, they would get these kind of fake gurus, and so, you know, there's no doubt a lot of Crowley's work was, it was contrix. You know, so the gurus like Krishnamurti was held up as to be, you know, the avatar, the new savior for the Lucis Trust, were funded by Annie Besant, and of course it was to bring in this new age religion. So to a certain extent, Crowley and the New Age, I mean, we wouldn't be. The whole concept of the New Age was based on Crowley's belief in the Eon of Horus. So the Agape Lodge, you know, things like Rosemary's Baby, Leary's Ken Kesey, the Grateful Dead, you know, a lot of it involved Crowley rituals. Manager of the Grateful Dead was head of the CIA. The rock stars, people like Jim Morrison, Hendrix, Laurel Canyon, all pretty much run by CIA. So the whole, a lot of those agendas, including the rock concerts, were also used for harvesting energy. And, you know, a lot of Crowley's work is about summoning energy, and often it was dark energy. So people like Ron Hubbard, you know, Scientology, Jack Parsons, you know, they were all following Crowley's rituals for opening portals, and they all got, as well, corrupted by Crowley's sex magic. So in a way, a lot of the sex magic stuff was a way of kind of dragging them into the satanic practices. And once they were in that trap, a lot of the politicians that were around at that time, I think Lloyd George and H.G. Wells were certainly names that I've seen listed in going to parties at Lord Tredegar's house, where all kinds of black magic rituals were taking place, and Crowley would be brought in to perform as a kind of a high priest of these rituals and these orgies and this drug taking, you know, on massive scales. And a lot of the members of the English establishment at that time, especially the liberal establishment, were clearly caught in these things. And of course, that the link to the espionage is that the use of honey traps is one that has always been used, you know, by both German and British intelligence. So, you know, and now of course the Russians are also masters of that. You know, the Mata-Hari syndrome.
So just to break there, just remember, we've discussed this before, that when it comes to politics, you're thinking and believing that, you know, you vote for the left, you vote for the right, for the Liberals, is actually having some effect. But it doesn't matter what numpties are in the Chalker Westminster. This is the power. Cabinet, as A.V. Dicey observed, the Cabinet was in theory nothing but a committee of the Privy Council. Yet, with the Privy Council, the Cabinet, has in reality no dealings, and thus the extraordinary result has taken place, that the Government of England is in the hands of men whose position is legally undefined. That while the Cabinet is a word of everyday use, no lawyer can say what a Cabinet is. That while no ordinary Englishman knows who the Lords of the Council are, the Church of England prays Sunday by Sunday that these Lords may be endued with wisdom and understanding. Unfortunately, I don't think the old Church of England's prayers are being answered, because they're all in the background banging the living daylights out of anything that breathes. So, you know, it's surely not good.
Profumo, you know, Profumo connects a bit to my family as well, because we were at that time when about Profumo and Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice Davis were connected to my father's crowd. So this has been going on and on and on, and again, where we are now is that Robert Maxwell was not exactly in Crowley's league, but the whole use of honey traps clearly developed, and now with Epstein's Island and the fact that we have to accept that most of the leaders in the certainly in the West and most of the intelligence agencies are all based on black magic practices and occultism, and a lot of the leaders are corrupted by, and their handlers have so much on them that they're controlled puppets.
Controlled puppets. Yeah, so remember Maxwell. He was doing the honey trapping, big time. Now, when he were murdered, everything he'd gained, everything he'd achieved, and remember, Piers Morgan was a big part of this. He was Maxwell's Schley. So when he's up and down giving it the big I am and this, that, and the other, just remember where this guy came from, Piers Morgan. Maxwell's little bum boy. And Maxwell created the network, all the mechanics that we today know as Epstein. Yeah, Epstein, the network we see as Epstein, there's no such thing. It was Maxwell's entire network handed over to Les Wexner, who then allowed Ghislaine, Maxwell's daughter, to continue to run it, and they put Epstein, Jeff, with Matt Ghislaine to front it, and they transferred it over into the US. Didn't mean to say it weren't going on here, so that's your phone tapping, all your phone tapping that's gone on. So you've got Brian Harvey, he's 17, he's telling you about his experience with the phone tapping, etc. Millie Dowell a day. You know, all this that were going on against Murdoch back in the day was originally the Mirror. He set that game up, he had the blackmail, he had the guts on everybody, which is why he got so far in his scams. You know, so you've got to see it in these terms. Everything's a continuum. It's just a continuum, but it's different. When you think it's something different, it's not. It's the same group of people using different people, obviously, for each generation, but the same mechanics in play. It's honey trapping, blackmail. That's what it's all about. You know, Trump, you know, Elon Musk, all these people, for whatever reason, have been photographed with Epstein, and Epstein running the face off saying, got you. He's mine. This guy's doing what I said. This is another one we've achieved. He belongs to us. That's what you're seeing with them pictures when you're seeing that smug look on Jeffrey Epstein, who in my opinion isn't dead. You know, so many of these people that keep dying, they're not dead. Just they've left that character, you know.
So the Satanism, you know, is rife, and a lot of this control structure can put down to the manipulative genius of Crowley.
Where does that take us in today's world in 2023? Epstein Island, Trump,
yeah,
Biden.
I don't know. The thing is, we're coming up to people that are still alive, and I have to be really careful because you know, I know what went on, but
well, it's caution on your behalf. Caution.
You know, all I can say is, but we are living in the Eon of Horus, and that a lot of this occult thinking and the black magic is not anything to be dismissed. You know, we go back to Elizabethan times, and the Freemasonry, Illuminati, whatever you want to call it, secret society, New World Order. They have a grip. They have a grip on the psychology of the world, and it's a ruthless agenda. And one of the the pillars of this agenda starts with the abolition of the sexes, the emasculation of the feminization of man, the combining of the sexes, and then ultimately transhumanism, which is the agenda which we're going to go into by 2050. So people like Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells, they were all compromised, and whether they were spiritually tainted, and whether that's part of the reason why these agendas are being put in place, it's open to conjecture. But from their point of view, if you look at Albert Pike, all the world wars are predictive wars, and the wars that we are now involved in, which is a hybrid war. I don't even know that we need kinetic wars. I think it's distraction, because the hybrid wars involve weather wars, the hard weather system. Psychic warfare and psychological warfare has evolved to such a level now that we're actually, the use of television screens, the use of technology, the use of... there's one thing I'd like to bring up here, which is a Huxley statement, which is quite relevant to finish off, if I can, that was written in 1948. Here we are.
There on the screen.
Have you got it?
Yeah.
So, Huxley, well, I don't really know, incredibly important character in the 20th century, for me personally, because of his links with both D.H. Lawrence, with Robert Graves, and with Aleister Crowley, three people who, I've been very interested in their work, whether for good or bad. And Huxley kind of was involved with all these people. When Lawrence died in 1930, Huxley seemed to have some fixation on Frida. He was there at their death, at Lawrence's death. A year later, Lady Chatterley's Lover was published. Lawrence died in poverty most of his life. He was kept in his slave-like state. Huxley spent a lot of the 30s in Berlin with Crowley, experimenting with the various drugs. And of course, the Huxley family were friends with, or used, Robert Graves's analeptic research to really get how useful hallucinogenic drugs, including mushrooms, and then the synthetic replacements they created to replace these shamanic vehicles for accessing other dimensions. So Huxley was massively important, and of course Brave New World was really just the agenda that was laid out by the Victorian Fabians, including T.H. Huxley, his grandfather, Julian Huxley, his brother, was also deeply involved in the British eugenics movement. They're all absolute obsessed with keeping their elite bloodlines protected, with culling the population, and Julian Huxley then became, in a way, was as important. Aldous Huxley was involved with the literary world and the counterculture. That was his remit. That was his that's what he could control. Julian Huxley became head of UNESCO. Was pretty much the scientific arm of the agenda, but it was just the enactment of the agenda that was set up by people like Thomas Malthus, that went through to Darwin, through H.G. Wells, through all these families that then created the Fabian movement and the fake socialist movement, the fake Marxist movement. And then you've got cultural Marxism, which is an inversion of communism, which, if you think that communism could be good, Marxism is an inversion of that, to con the masses into thinking that this is an agenda that they will be protected by. And of course then you get the nanny state, where really you just about got everyone caged in.
And the BBC?
Yeah, BBC, of course. The British brainwashing company. And so this quote by Huxley in 1948 was really the philosophy that it's almost like it's all condensed. So this was
something wrong with his right eye.
Yeah, he was blind. I like to think that's the eye of Horus, which was damaged by him injecting vril into it, and it might well be, but he was half blind. But a brilliant man, but he was no visionary. So this isn't someone who's having a vision like Graves' is visions. This is someone who is telling us what's going to happen to us. So saying in the next generation, a pharmacological method making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears. So when he talks about a pharmacological method, in Brave New World, he had a drug called Soma. So they've always used wars, these people, to cull the population. But you can only cull so many people. So, after the First World War, of course, they had Spanish flu, which was linked to the radiation towers, and that was the first mass injection program.
You're talking about AM radio?
No, First World War.
First World War,
Spanish flu.
But that was the first.
That was the first radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, radio waves, which of course we won't go into 5G and stuff like that. I'm not really up with the scientific methods, but anyway, the first mass vaccination program, and of course they were dying. So the drugs, they realise that there's only so many people you can cull and control. These people are unbelievable control freaks and psychopaths. So in order to control the population, you can control them by soft methods. In order to bring them back to their servitude, as he rightly said, you need to make people love their servitude. So by creating a drug culture, to a certain extent, you give them television, you give the masses this low level, you can dumb them down intellectually so much so that they're just happy with what they got.
And then there's the cathode ray tube, and now we have the black mirror, i.e. the LCD or the...
Yeah, exactly. So just going back to that quote, so Soma was the drug that was a happy drug. So they said as long as people are kind of content with their lot, they're not going to challenge our authority and they're not going to turn on us, because one of their big fears is the tribal mentality. So, this is what they're really afraid of, because basically, they're cowards. So they like to, all this stuff with controlling the working classes was another one of their agendas. So, the whole thing about Karl Marx is that, the whole thing about, an attack on the bourgeois. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the working classes aspired to be bourgeois. So the whole thing about you keep them so that, what they aspire to be, you attack. So, it's a Hegelian dialectic where they're covering both bases. As long as they're happy with their lot and they're going to go on and have the illusion of voting, and of course both sides are now, this has been a work in progress, that you control both sides of the narrative. So after Harold Wilson, we had no left wing, no Labour people in the, you get Corbyn and they destroy Corbyn.
I think you mentioned that Harold Wilson was taken out somewhere.
Well,
why did he suddenly resign?
Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson, I had a soft spot for, because he did, I think, do a lot. And my father-in-law, who worked a lot in Moscow, won't name him, he spent a long time, which I found very funny, living under Harold Wilson's house in the Scilly Islands, because Harold Wilson, the British establishment are obsessed with the fact that their own spies are not working for them. So the whole thing with Philby, Burgess and Maclean, George Blake, I was actually running around Wormwood Scrubs when George Blake escaped from Wormwood Scrubs, and the police all came. So that was in 1964, I think. I was actually on a cross-country run then. My father-in-law, the first father-in-law, was in electronic surveillance. That was his expertise. And he was in and out of Moscow. Later he went to Peking. He was bugging. And I said to them when I knew them, when they were talking to me, why were you bugging Harold Wilson? They thought he was the fifth man, because they think Wilfred Anthony Blunt was the fourth man after Philby, Maclean and Burgess. And they actually thought Harold Wilson was. But I think he was just an old school socialist. And of course, the real villain of the piece, as far as I'm concerned, was Ted Heath.
I'm just interested to remind you that Harold Winslow was the guy who prevented us from going into Vietnam with the US. You know, so obviously they weren't right happy with him. But just as a heads up there, which is why, as he's about to say, they needed Ted Heath. Completely compromised guy, completely compromised. And actually, it was Kissinger himself that pressed Ted Heath's buttons to make sure that he signed us up into the EU, which is an extension of the Fourth Reich. That's what it is. That, you know, the East knows all this. Everybody out there knows that the EU is just an extension of the Third Reich into the Fourth Reich. They can see that, the world. The idiots here in Europe, us, America, we don't seem to be able to see it for some reason. I mean, that's a major problem. That's a serious problem, that the rest of the world can see this and we can't. In the same way, they have to get rid of the idea of God. Yeah? They've brought all these Muslims here for a reason. And the kick-off will be whatever goes on, in my opinion, with this third temple. And their hope is that they've brought in enough jobs as immigrants, because the majority of people born here are not of that mindset. Some have been radicalised, I accept that, not stupid. However, in the main, people that call themselves Muslims that live here on Blighty are generally peaceful people. They're not running around doing crime, they're not breaking into people's houses, they're not they might rob your car, some of them, but they're just gangsters. It's not, you've got to separate that mix. But in the main, most people that are born here but claim to be Muslim, they're not the ones that are going to be called down to this nonsense, depending on what goes on in the Middle East next year, as we expect the second horse. And that has to be, it's to be understood not only by us, natives, but also by Muslims themselves, because they're going to kick that off next year. And by all accounts, if prophecy works well, it's going to work, it's going to succeed. But I would suggest they've had to import all these fruitcakes with the promise that all the white women are pissed loose and you can bang them whenever you want, which we're seeing now. We're seeing a lot of news reports where they're just picking girls up off the street, keeping them for whatever length of time, days sometimes, and then just leaving them to die after 4 or 5, 6, even 10 lads have had them as a sex slave for whatever time. You can see this happening. You can see this. And I think a big part of this, why they've pushed this grooming gangs gig for such a long time, is because they're trying to cement the idea that it's all Muslims that are doing this. You know? Now, I'm not excusing people that do that, but what I'm trying to get, we need to see in our minds that we can't just look at everybody carte blanche, and it's the same for them, that we're all mixed into this. You know what I mean? Otherwise, next year is going to be quite fun.
So they had to get Ted Heath in power.
Asset of the DVD.
Yeah, you can say that, Miles, and also what happened on Morning Cloud. I don't want to even think about, but Ted Heath was definitely a wrong one. Jimmy Savile,
Morning Cloud being his yacht.
His yacht off Jersey, with the boys' home there, where hundreds, dozens of children went missing, just like lots of children went missing from the Kincaid boys' home in Ulster when Mount von Battenberg had his yacht, and his wife Edwina was mistress of Nehru, and von Battenberg, or Mount Batten, what you want to call him, was let's say that children were going missing from that boys' home. But I think they wanted that
other MI6 asset, the IRA, they used to take him out.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, give the IRA credit, give them the publicity, and but it's a very murky world, as you know, and you never really know who to trust. And certainly, he got lung disease from spending so much time under Howard Wilson's house. Then you had the old fake story about the Ganex raincoat, and was it Marcia Falkender? Well, they normally find some, some sex scandal to get these people out of the picture for good or bad, like they did with with Matt Hancock, that fake story about him snogging that woman in that corridor, So
that was obviously but he's got connections with Porton Down.
Matt Hancock,
apparently.
of course he has. Yeah. So effectively, what he's saying is that you can keep people. It's the soft kill, is what is going on as well as the hard kill. So people are dying of obesity, diabetes, simply because they're not given the same food that the elites eat. The food is all being, we all know what's going on. So people will enjoy having their liberties taken away from them. Now, this is true because this is what I call a Luciferian belief system. These people, whoever they are, whatever you want to call them, I've got my own version of who they are, they still work on a karmic principle, in the sense that if you tell people what you're going to do to them, you're absolved from karma. So it's the ultimate abusive relationship, where it's also psychopathic, because you tell people what you're going to do to them. Like Klaus Schwab has told us what he's going to do to us. Bill Gates has told us what he's going to do to us. Yuval Harari has told us what he's going to do to us. So by telling you what to do, what they want is your compliance. So if they can get you to comply, from their point of view, they're absolved from karma, from karmic retribution, which is a bit of a perverse logic. But I think they also get the satisfaction of people committing mass suicide. So, they're leading people down that path that they end their own life willingly. And I think that's the ultimate form of abuse.
Yeah, you dig your own grave.
Exactly. So, just on that last bit, what's that last bit on that? So, they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing. Well, clearly we all know what went on with MK Ultra, or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. And this seems to be the final revolution. Well, that's very important, because what Aldous Huxley calls the final revolution goes back to a lot of the biblical prophecies and things like Revelations, which cannot be dismissed, like end times, and of course it taps into the final solution, Hitler's or the Nazis' final solution, which is pretty much the same agenda. It's the same agenda as the Fabian agenda. So the final revolution is where they think we are now coming up.
And again, I've spoke about futurism, haven't I? About how there's a lot of data out there to suggest that actually everything in Revelations as was for a time before, and that they've rehashed it, rebuilt it, and projected it as into the future, as is happening today. As a cover, it's actually a cover. It stops you from seeing that there are actually people like this that are moving always to do what we know is going on. And I mean, people go, well, okay, let's just have a look. So this is one other one that used to badger me when I was studying this stuff, and that is, so you look in the biblical context and it'll say, and so, this God's bigging himself up, saying, and what I do and you do will be seen in Babylon, in Shemesh, in Tyre. It never says, and they'll see it in Aceh. It never says that, or London, or Paris, or New York, or Milan. That's because it's an old gig. It's an ancient gig. And there again, this idea that what we're seeing today is because we've allowed it, we've believed it, because they've projected what was into our future. Anyway.
Too. And I think, Huxley would have think that most objectives have been achieved, and the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, which is all laid out in, you only got to go to Rockefeller's Operation Lockstep, read Klaus Schwab's The Great Reset. Klaus Schwab's father was a Nazi. These people in power, I mean, who voted for them? Unbelievable.
Well, they've taken power.
People people acquiesce.
We have complied with their power.
Exactly. Exactly.
How do you see people being non-compliant? How do you think you have a solution, or any thoughts on that?
Well, and Steiner used to talk about the walking corpses. And unfortunately, what Huxley would call the epsilons or the Elohim or the Goyim or just the plebs, are literally walking corpses. Once you can take over their resistance, and I think we've been tested with putting the face nappy on and not using cash.
There are some saying that up to 70 to 80% of the walking corpses aren't human in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's already happened. As Huxley said, that they've been done down, and also their chromosome 8's been taken from them. And
their chromosome what?
Chromosome 8.
What's that?
Well, a while ago, I'm not going to go too much into the V word, but there was a lecture that Bill Gates gave to the CIA about 20 years ago. I think young Bill Gates, probably a previous Bill Gates, I don't know if it's the same one now, where he said that the way to stop terrorism, which of course most terrorists are run by the CIA or MI5, was to take away their chromosome 8 gene. And chromosome 8 is what's called the God gene. So the Muslim threat fitted quite nicely into one of their agendas, because blaming them for the Twin Towers explosion, the last plane that supposedly went into the Twin Towers was number 93, which was 93 is the number of Thelema, and the Twin Towers, of course, was Crowley's ritual. If you can take away chromosome 8, you can take away what it is. It's being the God gene. It's the belief in divinity, or it's the belief in God. Whatever God you believe in, clearly one of the strongest belief systems is Islam. So, all these people that are prepared to die for their God. I happened to be driving from a nursery in South Kensington back in the day in the 80s, I think, when my kids were going at nursery, and I was living in Kensington, when the satanic ritual, what's his name? The Burning of the Books by Salman Rushdie. And all it was four people on a pavement with a little fire burning this book. So clearly it was a psyops that was set up. Afghanistan, British have been doing this for centuries. British do soft wars. So they're set up, use colour revolutions. Use agendas like Black Lives Matter to infiltrate societies, move them towards liberalism. Also, Buddhism as well, veganism, all these agendas. People think they're organically, set up. They're not. The counterculture movement, the feminist movement, it's all driving it towards an agenda, and they're all controlled. And it's very difficult to know the agenda you're put into. Like I was put into I'm not saying put into, but I grew up with the counterculture agenda. So now I completely mistrust the counterculture agenda to such an extent that I find it difficult now to listen to rock music, because I know a lot of these people have done a deal with the devil, And
if you look at Glastonbury, it's horrendous.
Glastonbury is a satanic ritual.
Yeah,
we all know that. I refuse to go, and it's just about the pyramid stage. I mean, everything is a Freemasonic ritual. And the Stones concerts in '69, there's always deaths and it's ritual killings. And of course, what they harvest the energy, like ley lines. Like you build churches on ley lines, or you build banks on ley lines. And pop festivals is ideal for harvesting the energy of youth, because I think it was one of the Huxleys that said, might have been one of the Milner groups, that by the end of this century, you can harness the energy of youth to set up revolution. So all these young people that are spoon-fed all this Marxism, socialism, vegetarianism, climate change, absolute bullshit agenda that is, run by George Soros, the all agents, foment all these revolutions. And unfortunately, they've been trying to set up these what they call colour revolutions in Eastern Europe. And of course, a lot of the Eastern Europeans are not having any of it. So how they then get around that is labelled them right-wing fascists. So you go to a football game and they'll have someone in a game in Hungary, and I go to a lot of football. They don't like tribalism either. So they'll have someone doing a monkey chant, and then of course, the West will get on their high horse, and all the footballers will take the knee, not knowing that Black Lives Matter is a political organisation set up by George Soros' Open Society. So, young people have been brainwashed to such an extent they can no longer think for themselves, and they're spoon-fed all these genders, and the critical thought has gone, and that sense of rebellion has gone, and of course by the mass doping, let's put it that way, pretty soon there's a lot of vegetables walking around that they will believe anything they're told.
Well, and on that note, we'll let that video be. But look, this is what they've done to the school. They've removed the ability for critical thinking on the flea bags. And I saw this in the homework that my flea bags are bringing back, where we were taught 2 times add 2 is 2. They had to go around this big sequence of nonsense, so that by the time they got 3 quarters around, they'd lost interest completely. And so they lost the ability to actually add up, to subtract, to divide, etc. This is what they've done. This is what they've been doing in the schools since 1997, when in came the Blur and these bunch of shag faggots. So, what can we say? Well, folks, I've kept you a little bit later again. They seem to be getting longer, these old live streams. And I can tell the fact that you weren't really making a lot of racket, you were listening. So obviously I'm going to put that up. I've missed some chunks out of it because obviously it might set off the algorithms. But to be fair, you've got the majority of that interview. Now hopefully there's some more. If there are, I'll watch them this week and I'll add them under the video when I set this off live for everybody when I get off this live stream. So, thanks again for joining me, chaps. I hope you've gained something from tonight's data. I hope you have a great week. And let's hope the weather, the 40 days of the Six Rhythms is over now, so we should be expecting 85 degrees, baking sunshine, right up now until the 24th of December. That's what I've ordered. I went on my ley line last week and said, this is how it is, crack on. So we'll see now whether it works or not. It might not, because they probably just thought, you're a dick, go away, like that to me, but we'll see anyway. So folks, thanks for joining again. As I said, have a great week, and till the next time. I'm sorry about that, I completely got that right up.